Hello, welcome to 1 Plus 1. I'm Stan Grant at the home of Poh Ling Yeow, someone you may know on site, you may have seen her on television, you may even have tried some of her recipes. But as you're going to find out, she's also someone who refuses to be categorised. Poh Ling Yeow, welcome to 1 Plus 1.
Thank you, Stan.
Who are you?
Oh, that's a very big question. I think that I'm a creative, feeling, fluid being.
It's interesting you use words and you didn't use a definition. You know, someone will say, oh, I'm Australian, or I'm an actor, or I'm a musician, or I'm Asian, or there'll be something definitive. You've gone for something that's
Nebulous.
very ill-defined. Yeah, very nebulous.
Yeah.
Is that because, and I have read a few things you've said about this, that you are an act of creation. You have been about creating who Poh Ling Yeow is.
Yeah, I think the way I operate is through curiosity. And so wherever that takes me, if I love it, is where I go. It's as simple as that. I'm not really driven by, it's nice to be recognised for things that you do, but that's definitely not why I do it. I am driven by the need to express ideas and to create beauty.
And yet, there is always that dissonance between how we may see ourselves and how the world sees us. Moving from Malaysia to Australia, the world would have seen you in a very particular way. Just because of what you are, just because of how you look, just because you were Chinese and you were arriving in a different country. How aware were you of what the world was seeing?
You know what's really interesting? It's taken me a long time to process this because I grew up with that whole cliche of not liking the way I looked because I didn't fit in and all you want to do is fit in when you're a kid. And it actually took me a long time to realise a lot of that was self-imposed because I never experienced much racism when I came here. I had to break it down one day. I was thinking, hey, that's really strange. I've never really... That's really just me feeling different. And I've made myself feel that way. Yeah.
I understand that feeling, and I understand what it is to feel different, because I remember when I was a boy and knowing we were an Aboriginal family and knowing my skin was darker than other kids, and sitting in a bath and rubbing my skin red raw and telling my mother, I want to get this off. I want to get the dirt off. I want to get the black off. I want to get this off. And it wasn't a sense of being ashamed of who I was. I don't think I had that. I just didn't want to be different, or I didn't like that thing about being... Is that what it was with you, do you think?
Yeah, I felt completely alien, and I tell this story all the time, but I remember lining up at the tuck shop and seeing a blonde girl with freckles and blue eyes eating a Sunny Boy. And I remember the sun hitting her arm at an angle so that her blonde hairs were just glistening in the sun, golden. And I remember just looking at her hairs and thinking, I will never be that. I will never be cool enough and have my hairs be shining in the sun golden like that and be eating a Sunny Boy. Like, it's such a weird abstract thought. And it really informed and like my behaviour. Like, I thought I was not able to do certain things, even though I was. But I was the one that put the little cage around myself. So coming from Malaysia, there's not much encouragement to do physical things like, you know, sports and all that kind of stuff. And I remember after she'd eaten the Sunny Boy, she ran up to this sort of jungle gym setup and swung from this really long rope. And again, I was like, I could never do that. It was like I lacked some basic imagination in terms of like what I was capable of doing and how I perceived my own confidence. Yeah.
Is that where Sharon came from? Was that a conscious act of creation in your part? Because Sharon was the name you used until into your 20s once you came to Australia.
Well, interestingly enough, in Malaysia, everyone gets, like my mum's Christina, dad's Stephen. So I was actually born with the name, but it was never on my, it was always used, but not on my birth certificate. And we didn't really use it. But I wrote it always on my school books, Sharon Poh Ling Yeow, and my brother's Casper. And then when we came to Australia, I just thought it'd be easier. Yeah. Because I did get teased a little bit about my name. Like, let's go bowling, polling.
That's what kids do.
Let's just default to Sharon. But that's as far as it got, really. Like, there wasn't anything
There wasn't
more
a conscious,
sinister.
I need to fit in here or...
No, definitely.
Yeah.
It was definitely because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sharon stayed with you for a very long time. Into your, as I said, into your 20s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was actually my ex-husband who suggested that I change it back to Poh Ling because he made this little, a short film that won the biggest short film prize in the world at the time, actually. And he named the film after me, and then in the credits, because I acted in it, and then he wrote Poh Ling played by Poh Ling. So when all the press happened, people that had never met me before started calling me Poh. And he goes, how good is that? He goes, we can ditch Sharon now. He goes, I've always felt weird calling you Sharon. And I was like, oh, it's really strange to do it now because that was when I just started to paint. And I was like, everyone's going to think I'm so pretentious, now that I'm a painter, call me Poh. And he goes, no, let's do it. Let's try it. And everyone just latched onto it really quickly. So that was a really big thing, I think, whether I knew it or not. Because it was him really encouraging me to... I guess, remember where I came from, and not to be ashamed of it in a way.
But isn't it interesting, I find this interesting anyway, that Sharon may have gone, Poh may have been there, but the girl you paint, that image of that girl that I see over and over and over in your paintings is what you are seeing, or is this what you were ashamed of? Is this the you that you were trying to create? Was there something more going on there?
Yeah, it was almost all the phenotypes I didn't like. This broad features, the broad nose and the almond-shaped eyes. So it was just an exaggeration of all those features that I wanted to confront, I suppose. And painting her over and over again has been really cathartic. Yeah, and it's worked.
What was it about that you didn't like, though? Is it because you looked at that girl and you said, I'll never have the sun glistening off my skin like that? Is that where it comes from?
Yeah, it comes from that. Yeah, for sure. Just always not... everyone talks about it all the time, but yeah, when you are fed a certain image in the media growing up and that's what you aspire to. Yeah, it's really hard to ignore that.
Something's normal and you're not...
You're not that.
But no one's saying that to you.
No.
No one's saying that's unattractive.
No.
You're internalising it.
Yeah, I'm internalising it. Because I had these really beautiful kids around me that made me feel really at home and were really interested in me, and I was the one that was like snapping my lunchbox shut, when I got fried rice or whatever weirdness.
That's the migrant story.
Yeah. That wasn't a sandwich, and sultanas. It was just, I think it was self-imposed. A lot of it.
There's something you said again that really struck a chord with me, and it's. People may hear what you're saying here about not liking the way you looked or wanting to be something else or projecting that onto your art and think, well, that's That's the girl ashamed of herself, or that's the migrant experience. And you said something that really resonated with me. And you said you felt like you were dropped in from somewhere else, because I felt like an alien.
Yeah.
And in fact, my brothers and sisters would always say that to me. He's like, he's a Martian. He's just not, he's not like the rest of us. The things that I wanted to do, how I saw myself. And when you said that, I thought, yes, it's not something that's easily explained away as just the migrant experience or the Aboriginal experience. There's something very personal about it.
It is, yeah. I've always felt beamed in. And it's funny because I felt it in Malaysia, where I looked like the rest, like everyone, you know, and I felt it here. And then and that's when I realised, oh, hang on a minute, I felt it in Malaysia. So that's when I realised it was something that was deep inside me. And I feel it everywhere I go. And I feel it especially when I'm in big crowds. I find it really highlights it somehow, because I like to stand back. I'm quite uncomfortable in big crowds. I'm not agoraphobic or anything like that, but I'll often stand back and observe, and I'm very aware that I'm not the same.
Keats, the poet, said something that always stayed with me and just really reminded me of what you just said then about big crowds. He said, an artist has no identity. A poet has no identity. And he said he used to feel when he was in a room the identity of other people crushing in and annihilating him. The expectation of what people would see or what you needed to be. He wanted to be free. Is that what you were feeling? I know it's an introversion as well, but
yes.
Is there something that's saying, I don't want to be defined?
Yes.
I don't want other people to crush in and annihilate me.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I've never heard it explained like that, but very much so. Yeah. I think that's what being in the media, I think that's something that I've really fought hard to break down, because in the media, people will think that they like you, and they're very quick to decide why without really digging very deep. And I've never really identified as being female or Asian or anything. I really just want to do interesting things. And it's funny when, you know, I'll get jobs that are very much steered towards, you know, how I look. And it's really funny because I go, you don't understand. I'm not your person for Chinese New Year. I'm like the worst Asian. I don't speak any Asian languages. And it's so funny because they always go, oh, no, you'll be fine. And then I get up there and I'm that dud that some present tries to get me to, MC tries to get me to speak Cantonese. And I'm standing there making a fool out of everyone. And I'm like, I told you so. And it's funny because for a long time, I felt a lot of guilt about that, cultural guilt that, you know, why am I not drawn to that? Because so many people really grapple with that and love rediscovering or, you know, finding their roots like that. I'm really comfortable with that now. I'm really comfortable with being a product of what my parents have done. They've brought me here. You know, I'm a migrant and I love a lot of my culture, but I also don't feel an impulse to identify hugely with it. Like for me, it is all about moving forward, and for me it's mainly about creativity. Yeah, and absorbing what's around me. I think sometimes looking too deeply into the past, I don't know how useful that is sometimes.
It was interesting when you auditioned for, you know, Masterchef and you went to cook something that wasn't. But see, that's again people not wanting to put you in that box. This is not what people expected. What were you cooking? Some French or what?
Kind of like nouvelle thing that they hated. And they were like, oh, why'd you do that? And I was like, well, I guess because I don't actually cook Asian that much. But then I very quickly felt not pressure. I knew it worked to my advantage to play to what I looked like, you know, because it makes you an easy character to identify and to, when with a sea of contestants where everyone's grappling to I guess, get airtime or, you know, be seen and understood, I very quickly realised, oh, okay, I'm an Asian girl cooking Asian food. And I was happy with that because at the time I was actually really interested in learning all the cultural dishes that I grew up with. So it worked. It accidentally played into what I was going through at the time. Because, yeah, I just felt like I'd lost so much of my culture, like the language, values. You know, I don't really identify with any of those things anymore. Food was the one thing that I felt I really had an intense and authentic interest. And I just really, I could feel it.
What do you mean by that? How do you feel that?
I think because I'm such a tactile learner, there is something about food that is very emotional and almost spiritual for me. Because recipes that have travelled through eons to get to me, I find that amazing. That it's got its own story and I'm now adding to that story, you know? Because one of the first things I cooked on Masterchef, I remember the judges going, why have you used a cutlet? That's like the worst cut you could have bought. You're in Australia now, you know, you've got this beautiful fillet that you could have bought or a whole fish or whatever. And I thought, oh yeah, so it's okay for me to let those recipes evolve because it tells of me here, like that it tells of my migration. So that's when I started to let go a little bit of that cultural guilt that I spoke of. And I was like, I'm allowed to be a product of my environment and what's happened to me.
And bring all of that history and culture and tradition with you. And there's something too, isn't there, about the simplicity of food and how it connects to everything that's around you and the people that you're with. There's the old saying, you hear it a lot, you know, multiculturalism has given Australia better food courts, you know, and it has, but it facilitates that exchange between people. And does that explain what Masterchef was able to do as well? When you look at the proliferation, especially of Asian contestants and the success of Asian contestants, the faces that you see in a program like that frankly you will not see on the news. The news, current affairs, these things are still predominantly, overwhelmingly white. And yet a program like this, through food, can open Australia up as well and facilitate a different exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a reason why the Australian MasterChef still reigns in terms of when compared to all the other franchises in the world, because we don't realise just how multicultural we are in the way that we eat and cook. We're really tenacious cooks and eaters because we travel a lot and we are such a young country, of course, without including the Indigenous cultures, but with the migrant cultures, in terms of the food history that we have here, it's very young. You'll get a Chinese contestant who's obsessed with French pastry or a Lebanese girl who's obsessed with Southeast Asian cuisine and that's all she cooks, you know? So there's just so much of that exchange that just doesn't happen with other things, I don't think.
And there's something about seeing those faces too on television into, you know, over 1 million viewers watching this representation of Australia.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's really special. I think the thing that is so powerful about food as well is that it has that ability, like when you break bread, it can cost so much. It has so much currency to overcome lack of language or religion or all these things. It's just that it's such a good facilitator of understanding and finding common ground.
It changed your life, didn't it? Do you think of the Poh Ling Yeow before Masterchef and the Poh Ling Yeow after Masterchef? Are you conscious of that change and how that played out in your life?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. I don't actually feel very different. And I mean, there are things that obviously did change in my life in terms of my career, but the way I think is exactly the same. Like my values have stayed very steadfast. I've only become more philosophical, I think, because when you get heli dropped into the industry, it's hard to manage if you don't know who you are. Yeah.
Clive James once said, fame simplifies. On one level, I think I disagree because fame can really complicate things too for the person at the centre of it. But for other people, it does simplify. Poh Ling Yeow, the cook. Poh Ling Yeow, the Asian cook. All the other things. The Sharon, the former Mormon, which we will come to. The artists, all those other things are condensed into this one thing. Fame can absolutely simplify your existence down to that one thing, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just find it really fascinating. After having been in the media for like 12 years, I still get asked the same set of questions that I got asked when I popped out of Masterchef. Do you still keep in touch with Julie? What were the judges like? What's your favourite ingredient? What's in your pantry? And I find it really fascinating that that's the sum of it. That's how people perceive me. I'm like a cartoon character, you know? Yeah.
There's a lot of love, though.
A lot of love.
A lot.
Yes. I always say, not complaining from on the yacht. Absolutely grateful. Yeah, no, couldn't be more grateful.
I like what you said a minute ago about it made you philosophical, because you said something else as well, and that you've tried to live in the world philosophically. I want to just go back a step, because that really came after something else that was critical to your life, and that was becoming a Mormon. And you had the absolute knock-on-the-door conversion, which I thought, a lot of people sort of close the door and send them on their way. This was the knock-on-the-door conversion.
Yeah. So Mum and I converted first. For me personally, I really love the ideals that it presented to me, being in this safe environment where...
How old were you?
I was 16, I think 16, yeah. And I really liked the idea of the wholesomeness of that environment. But I had that feeling still, the I think I'm an alien here. Because there wasn't room for me to grow philosophically, with organised religion, there is a lot of dogma and things there's no room for philosophical exploration. And I started to find very quickly that I felt stifled by it. But I hadn't been out in the world. So I was still living at home. And so for the time being, I thought, yeah, this is okay. And then I travelled.
Canada. And
also Utah. I went to Utah. Yeah. So I went to Provo, which is the university town where Brigham Young University is. And I hooked up with the antithesis of what my parents would imagine to be the best thing for me. He was this hellion, bikey,
Mormon bikie?
Yes. Well, he was in town to help look after his illegitimate child.
Okay.
So just that experience alone started to fracture everything that I'd known to be, what my life was. And then I went to Canada because I had a working visa there, and then that really blew everything apart. My first best friend was trans, and she took me under her wing and was just incredibly kind to me and showed me how to catch the subway and do all these things. And so after that, the world became very grey, not black and white at all. And so I came home really knowing that I couldn't really stay in the church anymore.
And where did it take you? I know, you talk about the creativity, and of course you've seen the career, but this idea of exploring the world philosophically, your whole life has been about wrestling with who you are, the assumptions about who you are, what you look like, what you believe, looking for something. Where does this philosophical journey take you?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really just about...
It's just open.
Open, yeah. It's open-ended. I mean, that's life, isn't it? And that's why I use the word fluid, because it's about a willingness to be proven wrong, and it's really just being willing to explore and have an open mind. I think that's all it is. I don't really have an end goal.
But Poh, that's not the world we live in now. The world we live in now is increasingly about certainty. Identity is front and centre, and people being defined in almost a militant way around what you are versus what you are not. What you're talking about there is almost a dangerous idea in a world that looks for certainty and not fluidity.
Yeah, I'm finding that difficult at the moment, to be honest, because I feel a lot of pressure to tell stories that I don't feel relate to me. Like, I feel like my story is not everyone's story. It's my story, right? So I feel like the more we try to pigeonhole, the more we're segregating at the same time. And I think that's really dangerous. And it's really funny because over the years working in the media, I get asked questions like, oh, what do you love? International Women's Day will come around and there's mega issues, that exist in the world where women's rights are obviously, still in the dark ages. But for me, when people ask me what's good about being a woman, I don't identify with being a woman at all. I identify with being a human. I don't think there's anything good about it. Or being an Asian, I just see myself as a citizen of the world, Yeah.
And yet we're living in a world where that identity can be prosecuted down to even what someone eats. I've heard stories about people being criticised for cooking Mexican food if you're not Mexican, or someone who doesn't like a particular food, or being accused of being racist for not liking a particular... I mean, that's the level of debate around the sort of identity issues, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because people aren't... I don't think they're thinking through what they're saying anymore. It's like the politics precedes being in front of a human,
You want to cook what you want to cook. And if you bring your respect and love and curiosity to that, that can be an experience that we share rather than one that divides us.
Yes, I mean, food is so powerful. If we start taking things like that away, I mean, how are we going to ever find common ground and build on being tolerant? Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? You look at your life and the journey you've been on and that fluidity and the freedom that you've sought and to live in the world philosophically and not be defined. And really it began in Australia, didn't it? It was the moment of coming here. It was almost like Australia was waiting.
It was, yeah. From the moment when my parents told me we were coming to Australia, I had such a vivid thought. I was 8 and I just had this crystal clear thought, oh, yes, of course, everything's going to make sense then. And then I arrived and it did. Like, I just loved the country right away. The smells, the sounds. And I always talk about seeing the street signs and finding them really beautiful too. Yeah.
We're glad you came.
Thank you.
Poh Ling Yeow, thank you so much for talking to us on 1+1.
Thank you so much for having me, Stan. It's a pleasure.